Good morning, everyone. My name's Tommy Johnson. I'm with the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to IT Basics for Business. This is our newest breakfast seminar series, and it provides useful do-it-yourself solutions and insightful actionable tips specific to IT. I want to thank Uprise Partners for allowing us to bring you this virtual event series for the entire season. I'd like to welcome you all to this first installment of IT Basics for Business for the calendar 2023-24. This four-part bi-monthly season-long series runs from November through May. Today's topic, Your Top Tech Questions Answered, is presented by Melinda Gagnon, Chief Executive Officer, and Brian Gagnon, Chief Technology Officer at Uprise Partners. Uprise Partners is our presenting sponsor of IT Basics for Business for this entire season. They specialize in IT, cybersecurity, software engineering for small and medium-sized businesses. They're headquartered in Maine and have team members and customers across the U.S. For the past 3 years running, they've been named one of the top 100 security firms in North America and among the top 500 managed service providers in North America. Reach out if you'd like to have a discussion on how they can help you streamline and optimize your day-to-day technology so you can focus on running your business. Now, like all Chamber virtual signature events, today's presentation is free, and it will be recorded and made available for free replay on the Chamber's website and YouTube page. To keep up to date on all the Chamber's news and events, please visit our website, portlandregion.com, and check out our events page and sign up for our weekly email newsletter when you're there. Before we get to today's presentation, I'm proud to share that we're still using our platform of StreamYard for all of our virtual Chamber events. This platform provides many improved production and interaction elements that I think you're going to be happy to see. I'd also like to remind you that if you have questions for our presenters, please type them in the YouTube chat, and they'll be relayed at the conclusion of the presentation. And we're going to save a little bit of time, hopefully, for a robust question and answer period. Now, at this point, I'd like to introduce our presenters. Brian Gagnon is the Chief Technology Officer at Uprise Partners and is a technologist with 25 years of experience building, scaling, and optimizing business ecosystems. Prior to Uprise, he served as the head of Global Systems Engineering at HGST Western Digital, was a global architect at VMware, and built and led several tech companies. He specializes in cybersecurity, tech infrastructure design, public-private hybrid cloud architecture, data management practices, and data science platforms. He's also a mentor with Techstars and Mass Challenge. When Brian's not busy with technology challenges, you can find him outdoors, scuba diving, hiking, and fishing. Melinda Gagnon is the CEO of Uprise Partners and has more than 20 years of experience in business strategy and technology. At Google, she was a founding team member of the Ad Technology Organization. She's a senior partner at the world's largest media holding company, WPP, where she founded and led their consulting organization and the product management and technology organization. She specializes in business resiliency planning, communications technologies, product management, and technology operations. She's advised clients such as Procter & Gamble, General Electric, Volkswagen, BlackRock, and Walmart, as well as hundreds of startup organizations. She's a Maine Venture Fund board member and a mentor with Techstars, Mass Challenge, and the Maine Center for Entrepreneurs. She's an avid skier and scuba diver and also a certified yoga teacher. With that, I'll turn things over to Melinda to kick things off.
Thanks so much, Tommy. Really appreciate the introduction, and good morning, everyone. I'm glad that you're with us and appreciate you starting the day this way. So we want to start with going over what we see most often, and that really is the impetus for this next webinar series. So at Uprise, we talk with business leaders day in, day out about how their technology is working best for their business, and of course, how it's not working so well for their business, and see how we can solve that. And they all recognize the need to use IT in a way to fuel growth and efficiency for their business. And often these key strategic questions keep coming up. So those questions are things like, how can we be more efficient? How can our information be more readily accessible? How can my team be more productive? How can we train our team to keep our information secure? So as we're having all these conversations, we notice that there are some specific themes that keep coming up. And those themes are the items that we want to talk about in this next webinar series. So time and time again, when we're answering those strategic questions, we talk about the cloud. We talk about AI, artificial intelligence. email, spam, different productivity tools. And then, of course, cybersecurity and phishing being a big one of those. Most data breaches happen because of human error. So this is a really big area that we're constantly answering questions of, working with our customers on. So today we want to go over the cloud. So we'll talk about what the cloud actually is. It's one of those things that, we all hear about it. I think we all kind of know what it is, but we'll talk about what it actually is and then how we can use it in the best way for our businesses and our teams. And then have a more nuanced conversation around cloud versus on-premises, or you'll hear it also called on-prem, and how we can use both the cloud and on-premise solutions to really get the results that we're looking for at a cost that makes sense for our investment. So what is the cloud actually? We hear all about it, and the cloud was invented back in the 60s, so it's been around for a while. And the term cloud computing really got going in 2006. So the cloud is a metaphor. So it's not a physical entity. It's a network of servers around the world in data centers, and they're connected and they're meant to operate as a single ecosystem. So I think that's the best way to think about the cloud. Think about it as an ecosystem, as a system, and it's a shared resource. So I'll give an analogy that I think will help kind of bring this to life in a way that is a little more tangible. So if you think of your public utility being your water resource as the cloud, that is a place that we can start. So there was a time when every household, every town, every farm had their own water well. So today, most people have this shared public utility that gives us access to clean water. We simply have to turn on the tap. And cloud computing works in a similar fashion. So just like turning on the tap in your kitchen, cloud computing services can be turned on when you need it and turned off when you don't need it. And also, just like the water company, there's a team of dedicated professionals making sure that that service is available. It's secure, it's reliable, it's ready to go 24/7. And also, when the tap isn't on, you're not only saving water, but you aren't paying for that water that you don't need, those resources that you don't need. And the cloud works in a similar way. So, it has that always on availability, turn off, turn off, turn on, turn off when you need it, and the infrastructure is maintained. So if we take that example of going basically that local solution, the well, that on-premises solution, taking it to the cloud or the public utility and move that backwards, there is a trend of going from cloud to on-prem when it comes to your power grid, that public utility. So I'm sitting in Bethel, Maine, and I know that myself for my home and for our office and lots of our neighbors have installed solar. So solar panels and batteries, because that public utility has no longer become so reliable, right? We get a lot of power outages. And not only do we get those outages, it's not as reliable and secure, it also is getting more expensive. So that started to open up the conversation of, well, does it make sense to invest in this on-premises solution? So this solar system. So in this case, we have both the public utility, so you can tap into the grid when you need it, but also that solar system, that on-premises solution if you need it. So that's actually a hybrid solution. And hybrid is a term that we use when we talk about cloud solutions. So if you have both. And of course, if you totally went off grid and you just cut off access to the power grid, that would be 100% on-premises solution. So hope that helps just draw a little bit of a parallel to the physical world on what we have going on when we talk about the cloud. So, what does the cloud actually do for us? So, these servers are designed to either store data, run applications, deliver content. So, when you're watching Hulu or Netflix, that's coming from the cloud, accessing email, or any kind of office productivity software you may use, like HubSpot or Salesforce. And then, of course, your social media sites as well. So you're using the cloud day in, day out. You don't even know it. You shouldn't know it. It should just work. And really, the crux behind this is instead of accessing files and data from a local or personal computer, you're accessing them online from any device that is connected to the internet. And the great thing about this is the information is available anywhere you go and anytime you need it. So when we talk about the cloud, who provides the cloud? And I think we all know the usual suspects when it comes to cloud providers, but I wanted to just give you a quick look at the top providers. So we have Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services. You'll also hear that called AWS, the Google Cloud Platform. And then the fourth here is private cloud. So we'll talk about what private cloud is here in a moment. And I also want to just give you a quick reminder, as Tommy mentioned, if you have any questions, we'd absolutely love to answer those for you. So you can just put those in the comment section of the YouTube chat, and we'll answer those at the end of the webinar. So would love to bring Brian in now to talk about how you can use the cloud and some different options that you have.
I thought you were doing so awesome. I was going to take a nap over here, but yeah, when we talk about the cloud, I think that was a great intro, and it actually kind of came up with a bunch of different thoughts. Over the last 10 years, everybody has probably heard so much about this that it's probably we're blue in the face at this point. But when we start to really analyze why does someone choose the cloud or why does someone run away from the cloud, I think it's pretty simple. And Melinda, much like you said, right? If all of a sudden you turned on the tap and twice a month you didn't have water and you were on a public utility, eventually there's a tipping point, when you haven't had a shower twice in the month when you really needed one, you start to get a little angsty about it, and the value prop might not be there anymore. And you might look at an average well probably costs $5,000 to drill. You start looking at that resource and saying, you know what, I actually want to own the infrastructure because I can, and I can actually contain costs because they just keep raising the price. And now there's like a minimum. So even if I don't use it, I'm getting charged. A lot of the same stuff has happened in the public cloud for IT. And we're now starting to get to that point. And the really interesting part is there are more customers now than ever that are actually going back to a hybrid solution where maybe they put a bunch of stuff to the cloud and then all of a sudden the bills started coming, right? And it started small because it was easy to get going, but then that scaled, and now all of a sudden you're questioning, hey, do we really need to pay this bill month in, month out? And if we say, hey, we don't want to pay it this month, we still have to pay it because it's basically a lease model, right? So they take the car away if you don't pay the bill, kind of thing. So when we think about it, there's really three types of cloud. There's public, there's private, which means it's a cloud in your organization that you might use for different applications. You might use for different file shares and things like that, but it's inside your walls. It's highly efficient, and it's really set up in a way just like Google or Amazon or Microsoft would set up their cloud. So the great news is it's gotten cheaper than ever to A, procure hardware, B, to set up really your own cloud that's very flexible, that you can spin up new machines, new servers really quickly. So that's a wonderful thing. But there are still some downsides of why you might not want to do that, right? You may want to have just like actually like our solar system, it's technically a hybrid system. While we could flip the switch to CMP and make that go away, we can actually also do the opposite, which means when we get 2 feet of snow in Bethel, hopefully, because we're a ski town, we actually have the ability to still get some power that maybe doesn't need to come from our batteries. So we could tap into CMP in that situation if we need to. Otherwise, we'd have to put more and more batteries in, and now all of a sudden the cost may not make sense anymore. So it may make sense to use the public utility, but also have the ability 9 times out of 10 to be self-sufficient. The cloud is very similar, and a lot of people are now realizing, hey, 100% of anything maybe isn't a great idea, right? So that hybrid approach is really starting to make a lot of sense. I like to tell the story of, if you need a pickup truck, you might buy a pickup truck, but when you look at them these days, as many people have, if you need a pickup truck, they're $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, right? So you have to think long and hard. How much do I use the pickup truck? Well, I go to Home Depot once a month, or I go to Home Depot every 3 months, right? Probably don't need a pickup truck. So now you start making different decisioning. And so you look at it and you say, you know what, I can go to Home Depot and just rent their pickup truck for the day. Yes, the cost is higher, but I'm only paying for when I need it, and I bring it back that day, and I don't have that big outlay. But all of a sudden, if you've got your hobby farm with chickens and everything else that it seems like all of our friends seem to figure out over COVID, you might need a pickup truck because you're going to the Tractor Supply and the Paris Farmers Union and wherever else to get your supplies every week. And having to wait and having to schedule and plan may not make sense. Also, if you live in the big city, you may not want to pay for parking. You may not want to deal with snow bans and all the fun things that we deal with here in Maine. So you might just say, you know what, I'm just going to Uber it, right? Now you have no car, you have no insurance, and no all of that. You also have no control. So if somebody isn't available, you may not get a ride. If there is demand pricing, you may pay 3 times as much as you normally do, right? So these are the types of things that drive decisions. It's the same in IT. If your power costs go way up, if the server price goes way up, if you can't find an IT professional or a service organization that does everything you need, all of these things might be driving facts of why you go to the cloud. So that's key, and those are sort of the different pieces to it. So if we could advance, that would be cool. Thank you. So kind of breaking it down a little more, that's like the big buckets. Where does this cloud live? It could live in your office. It could live in Amazon's data center, right? Or it could be between the two. When we think of different cloud services, there's something called infrastructure as a service. That's exactly what we're talking about. Power, cooling, water, all those types of things. That's an infrastructure need, right? So this would be like, we move just the server up into the cloud, you get rid of the server, and now all of the stuff the server did is up in the cloud, and it does everything you need. Amazon, I'm just going to use Amazon as an example. Amazon manages all the hardware. They manage the power to it, the cooling, the networking, all of those things. And they charge you for every single one of those things quite handsomely. But at the end of the day, you don't have to worry about any of those things. If the physical hardware that's on fails, if lightning strikes or whatever, that's on them, and they've got to get you back up in a certain time period. So that's infrastructure as a service. Things that they don't do. They don't manage Windows for you on there. They don't manage your application. They don't manage how you set up your application. They don't manage your security. They don't manage your usage, right? And how you use it, whether it's configured properly or misconfigured. None of that stuff is on them. That's all on you, right? And my general rule of thumb is, if you're putting stuff in the cloud, you need to still be responsible for backing it up, right? That's one of the probably the biggest missteps that many people make is they put stuff in the cloud thinking, oh, great, I don't have to worry about it anymore. But the reality of it is, if you're not backing it up, just like you were before, you might not have the resiliency that you think you have. Sure, they might have, $100 million data center with 3 different places that power comes from and cooling and multiple servers to have your stuff readily available. But downtime still happens in the cloud. It's happened a number of times, and it's taken out a lot of businesses. Actually, they just don't talk about that because there's also a lot of benefits. So they surely focus on the benefit. So that's infrastructure. Most people don't. We don't really talk about that, but you can see, right? The cloud is a pretty broad topic, broad brushstroke word that covers so many different things. Technically, if you use ADP Pay, you've been using the cloud. They are probably one of the oldest cloud providers because they basically outsourced payroll. They made it easy to see and do all the stuff. And you just had to worry about like getting them what to pay people. They handled all the rest. And then over time, obviously apps and stuff, they introduced that. But, that's a different experience. Platform as a service is a little bit different. Platform as a service would be using something like WordPress or a web hosting platform that lets you also build your website right in the platform. That is a platform as a service. They manage the physical hardware, they manage the operating system, they manage the application that you need to be able to build what you want to build for either a web application, a website, for instance, or something like that. Salesforce has a platform. You can build tools in that for your Salesforce instance. Just a couple of examples. So they cover a lot more. You have a little bit less flexibility in what you can do, but they do take care of that. So if it actually fits for your use case, it's wonderful. Lastly, software as a service. This is the one I hear a lot of people say, oh, we're going to the cloud. We had, X and it was, in our data center, but now we're going to just use this application somewhere else. That's wonderful. We use, we're 6 years old now. I would say we built this business primarily on SaaS-based software. You'll hear it called that, SaaS, right? So we bought stuff that we just didn't have to manage. It got us up and running quick. All that we have to manage is how it's set up, some of the nuances of security, the configuration of like how we want to use the software. So maybe it's something like HubSpot. I don't know what they have for servers that run that. I don't care as long as it's running. I don't care what they have for networking as long as it's running. And I don't care what patch version they're on or if it's patched or whatever, because they guarantee that they take care of that. We don't even see that, right? So that's all wonderful. But there are some downsides to this too. The further you move down the stack that we're talking about, the less control that you have and the less ability you may have to do something, either nuanced or, and I hear it a lot. I was just having this conversation with somebody yesterday. They're a big oil company and they've moved off of file shares and file servers to something a little more modern, which is SharePoint. They have tons and tons of files, tons of folders, and a lot of data. And one of the things that they said yesterday was, hey, everything's working great, but we've got a lot of legacy folders that apparently are having a problem because the name is way too long for the folders. Can you go in and change the settings so that the folders could be a longer name? And the answer is no, because that's not how Microsoft has it configured. That's not a setting that we could change. If that was something maybe that we had more control over, we could do that just like they did before with their file server. But they're now like having to understand, okay, well, that kind of, is going to take us some time. We're going to have to rename this stuff. So that's an example where, there isn't all of the control and all of the change. Whereas if you sort of owned it, you might be able to have a little more flexibility there. So that's sort of the 3 different types of cloud services that you hear a lot. You'll hear a lot of people say, oh, we're in the cloud. that could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It's okay. It's however you're using it that makes sense. So, all right. The really interesting part is almost 90, and this kind of expands on that, right? 94% of businesses, if you ask them today, are you in the cloud? 94% of them actually have something in the cloud. It might be payroll, it might be HubSpot, it might be Salesforce or Microsoft O365. It could be any of those, right? And a vast majority of those are small businesses, just like us, right? And the nice part about that is when you're a small business, lets you get up and going quick. I think the other piece is we are seeing numbers trend to more of a hybrid solution now. And I think there's a lot of people, and you have to see where these surveys come from, because we found a few that were very serving to a cloud provider. The reality of it is we see a lot of businesses that went or tried to get to 100%, started getting the bills, and then quickly started to say, hey, how much does it cost to drill a well, or how much does it cost for us to just house this internal? So I think those numbers, if you saw them over time, there are a lot more people that are going back to cloud. And I call it, too little, too late, too much, too soon. With adoption and technology, a lot of people see something or they hear the trend, and then they say, oh, we have to do 100% cloud because that's what everybody's doing. And then you run like crazy to do it, and you get to this tipping point where all of a sudden some of your critical apps or some of your flexibility may disappear, or the cost benefit may go away, and the flexibility of how you costed it might go away. And all of a sudden you say, no, we have to go the other way now, right? And that's too much too soon. You went too fast. And now you end up starting to create a policy that says, hey, remember when we put stuff in the cloud and we went too fast and we didn't understand everything? We got a huge bill. The next app that you want to maybe move there, you're going to say, hey, pause. We need to do a lot more research before we do that, which arguably maybe you could have done beforehand, but it's okay. We all do it. So I think when you look at that trend line, there's a lot more people that are, either they did too little and it's too late, and so they're sticking with their guns, or they're moving back and getting a little bit more balance. So, moving forward, we talk a ton about hybrid and taking advantage of, the best of the best, right?
And I think, Brian, when you talk about the best of the best, that's exactly the balance that we're trying to bring when we talk to customers about this. And really the main challenge is that companies are looking for that golden goose, right? They're asking for more capabilities, they're asking for agility, and at the same time they want to reduce costs, but those things don't always work together. So of course, typically if you increase capabilities and agility, it will come with a higher price tag. So when we want to think about how to best balance those costs and capabilities, we really have to look at that bigger picture of what makes sense for business needs as they stand today, and how are those needs going to change in the future as the business matures and grows. So that that change and that scalability is something that's really, really critical to look at.
Hey, Melinda.
Yes.
I'd love to add something. I was just thinking about this. If you were a manufacturer, for instance, and right before the pandemic, you decided, there's this place down the road that can do all my manufacturing. They've got all the tools, they've got all the stuff. I just pay them a simple, easy fee. Only when we need the stuff, it works great. And that's going fine. Then something like the pandemic happens, and all of a sudden supply chain gets all messed up. And now you're competing maybe with a lot more people, and you go to get your monthly run of stuff done, and they might not have availability. And now all of a sudden you start to get nervous that you're not going to be able to produce the things you need. Now all of a sudden, once again, you're looking at, well, maybe I need to buy my own stuff. Maybe I have to have my own warehouse. Maybe I need to ... right? So these are just some examples that are maybe less technical, but also have the same results with, too much too soon.
And I think that's also a great point when you think of the resiliency planning side of the equation. Maybe you don't need that, local on-premise solution all the time, but maybe there is a case where you need to have that backup plan, right? So there are different kind of levels of planning for this. Planning for the solution for the, I'll say business as usual, the plan, right? But also what is the scenario if we do have an outage, if something unforeseen happens. So that's part of that resiliency planning that we never want to talk about, of course, things unexpected happening, but we need to plan for it to make sure that we have that continuity. So as you can tell, there is a big debate, right? When we're talking about how to balance these solutions, what is the right mix? How do you plan for today and the future? And the great debate is, cloud versus on-premises or both, right? So would love to talk through more about how we can weigh these different options. So Brian, you've worked with many Fortune 500 customers on this very thing of, migrating to the cloud, designing those hybrid solutions. So can you walk us through the high level pros and cons of each one and dive into that a little more?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say size in this case does matter, right? If you have a huge, bunch of demand, right? The ability to fully utilize that if you own all of your assets probably makes sense, right? It probably makes sense to have an on-premises approach in some way, shape, or form. It is an asset, appreciating asset, especially if you're not getting value out of it. But if you're able to get value out of it and you've got that thing just cranking away, it's a good asset, right? And it has a pretty long lifespan. It's very hardware centric. It's very capital centric, right? Versus an OpEx model, which is the cloud, where you just pay your monthly bill and, hey, it's all good. You stop paying the bill, you stop getting the service, right? But you're kind of throwing technology and hardware at the problem that has upfront cost. You can get a leasing model, maybe, where you go to Dell and you get leasing and you can do something very similar and get your costs just so, provided, the big caveat is, provided you are fully utilizing the equipment you buy. Somebody that's running a construction company who goes out and buys an excavator and uses it 25 or 30% of the time probably isn't going to get the value out of that, whether they lease it or not, right? You're paying for a hunk of hardware to just be sitting in the yard and it's not getting used. Well, a server is no different than an excavator. If you don't use it, you're paying a lot more. The cloud model is much like going over to the rental center, right? So you are renting it, you are paying a whole lot more, right? And when you look at things like cost, when hard drive prices come down, when memory comes down, and all the the geeky stuff behind the scenes, let's just say when the cost of a server comes down, what we're seeing is the cloud isn't necessarily lowering their prices over time. So when some of those challenges come up where you can actually get hardware that's cheaper, you're not always seeing the advantage there. So there are advantages that if you're savvy, know how to set the stuff up, you can build something as cost effective or more cost effective, but you have to be utilizing it, right? And that's frankly what Amazon does. The reason Amazon started is Amazon was a book company, right? They sold stuff that was heavy, that sat in warehouses and took up a ton of space, right? That's how they started. And when you think about it, what happens every this time of year? Your inbox gets filled with email for every Cyber Monday, Friday, Wednesday, whatever it is now. But this is the busy time of year that retailers make all their money, right? So they get a big burst. If they've got a website, they need more web resources because more people are going there. If they've got a store, they staff up, right? So when you think about that, that's a very bursty business model where you get seasonality. and you have to architect for that high time and then back away from it at the low time. When you're spending capital, you're buying resources that can be expensive. That's why Amazon kind of started the cloud. They had a bunch of resources that they didn't use. It's why Walmart actually has a huge private cloud. They have a bunch of resources, and the rest of the time, they could actually sell that out if they figured out a way to monetize that. So I just say that, and that the name of the game is to fully utilize the hardware you've got. If you can do that on premises, is wonderful. JP Morgan Chase has, I'm going to guess, 35,000 servers. They have 10 plus data centers that all cost hundreds of millions of dollars, right, to build out. They have enough demand internally to build out their cloud and take all the different departments that used to have their own IT and fold it in and say, no, this is our cloud. We want to fully utilize it. Do they still probably use AWS and Azure and Google? You betcha, because there are times and places where that cost maybe makes sense because they can move really fast and get what they want. But that over provisioning requirement is what causes a lot of cost. The other piece is when you're building out something that needs to be highly resilient, what happens if the place that it's in has a fire or a water leak? Most likely a water leak, right? That's, number one way to take out a data center. It doesn't play well with water. So when you think about that, now you need another site. Maybe you have the other site. Maybe you have 2 warehouses and a headquarters, and that makes sense, right? Because you already have networking between them. So maybe it makes sense to put something at another site. That's great. But if you don't, and you have 20, 30 people in one building, and you have some servers there, now you got to figure out, where am I going to put these other servers so that if the building has an issue, we still can do business, right? So that's the type of stuff that really starts to get expensive and complex if you don't have a place for it. If you do, it makes perfect sense, right? Also, understanding what your business needs for resiliency is really critical. You may show me something that, hey, this is our business, and if we're down for more than an hour, we're losing $10, $20, $50,000 an hour or something. That's a pretty major chunk that you're going to lose. It probably means we should architect something that solves that. So that's on-prem. That's some of the good parts of it. That's some of the things that you've got to watch out for. And obviously, if it's done right, it can be highly flexible and very cost effective. So, all right, public cloud. We've already talked about this a lot. Primary appeal, I would say they do a great job advertising. They're everywhere now. So we hear about it a lot. It's I always joke that if it's in like Sky Mall magazine, it must be true. But the reality of it is, it's really fast. It's super easy to put in a credit card. You don't have to call an IT person. You could just put in a credit card and voila, you've got something, and you too can be dangerous with your infrastructure, right? There are a lot of other things that you have to do to make sure it's secure, make sure it's fast, make sure it's secure, and make sure it's secure, right? And I say that's, a lot of people think, oh, hey, this is great, it's so fast and easy. And then you find out you also have shadow IT going on where, somebody over in accounting decides, oh, this looks like a cool app. Look, I just put in a credit card and it's up and going, right? Doesn't mean that that's secure, that it's built secure, or that it has your best needs in mind. The other piece is cloud lock-in is real. So getting into some of these platforms, there's always something that makes it hard to get out. It might be that they've got some specific app that you can only get some of your data out, but maybe not all of the other things that you had to configure along the way. There's cloud lock-in is real. They don't really want you price shopping. The reality is you want to be able to price shop, right? Because, Amazon traditionally has been one of the leaders. Their prices are higher a lot of times than the other 2 major providers. And I would argue in many cases, we've got a bunch of data center now for our stuff, because over time, when it worked great for starting out and it was very resilient and fast for me to set up, as we have a team that is supporting other stuff, it's easy for them to support. We already have a lot of those costs, they're landed costs. It's easy for us to just manage our own stuff and much more cost effective. So that's a big one. And lastly, it's a leasing model. You get nothing at the end. If you decide you need to repurpose or something like that, while it sounds easy, there's still cost, and you have to, you can't always use it the way that you want, right, over time. So that's another piece to it. So I think we've talked this out pretty well. So
Yeah, and I think if we wanted to bottom line it, and granted, if you are a new business, a small business, or mature business, larger business, it doesn't always track one-to-one, right? Every business is different. Your needs are different in terms of performance, in terms of reliability, all of that. But if we think about a new business, for example, the cloud is a great place to start. It reduces that amount of capital that you need up front. It allows you to get going quickly, and it does allow you to rapidly scale. So all of that is great when you're just getting started. And because the cloud exists, that has been a boon for new businesses, because that barrier to entry in terms of getting a business up and running is lower. So that's a huge, huge advantage. And what we have to keep in mind is, when is that point in that growth curve for the business and that change in need where 100% cloud really should be revisited. And there are a couple of examples that, companies that we all know, Dropbox, Netflix, that were both very cloud dependent early on, and they drastically reduced their cloud usage early because those costs really started to skyrocket. So that happened with their evolution, that they worked through a different hybrid solution. Brian, anything else that you would add in terms of what more mature organizations should consider with hybrid?
Yeah, I would say don't rush to sell off your hardware per se, because there may be a use, or if you've got a savvy IT provider, there's definitely ways to get value out of older stuff. Because if you think about it this way, you might have a server that is 4 or 5 years old. Most hardware has gotten really reliable and could last quite a bit longer than that. Would I bet the whole farm and put the most important thing of my business on that? No. But there might be cases where you can use some of that older hardware for, maybe you want to test something, right? Or what have you. You've got it set up, you could probably get it repurposed and try that at a very low to nearly no cost, right? Obviously, power and cooling, you don't want the thing running in a shed and it's 90 degrees out there. It's not going to last very long. But, provided you think of power and cooling as something you just pay, you might be able to reutilize something like that for, a new project, maybe some innovation you want to try out, and not have to pay for the cloud in that situation. So just something to think about. A lot of value-added resellers and MSPs, people that sell you hardware and software. We're not one of them. We don't actually believe in selling that, but or making a business model out of it. But what I would say is, don't let people sell you on just going to the cloud. Don't let people sell you on, hey, that stuff's old, we got to throw it out, because you may be able to use it. A savvy provider will tell you, look, that's going to cost you more than you can get. You can either, if you want something like that in-house, you could buy it over here where it's not critical. You might be able to get something that's off lease or slightly used and refurbed. But I wouldn't recommend using that, because it is probably really pushing the bounds. That's one way to think about it, I think. Sorry, this is me. So I guess the key takeaways really are, if you don't understand your business and how you're using technology and how you rely on the technology, going to the cloud is a little bit of a crapshoot, right? It would be like saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to sell the car because I'm just going to use Uber, but not maybe fully understanding the cost, how much you use it or whatever, or what it looks like when you really need it, when you're in an emergency, right? You might not be able to wait 30 minutes or 40 minutes for the ride share to show up, right? You might need something because of your situation that's more, more immediate. So I would say understanding your business needs, your resiliency needs, what's your toleration to loss, and then also knowing what the true costs are, right? Sometimes I hear, oh, hey, it's cheaper. The cloud is just cheaper. Are you taking into consideration all the things? Also, somebody needs to manage the security. Somebody needs to manage the backups and all that. So just make sure you understand what your business needs and what the costs associated with that are, so you can make a really true comparison before you just do a 100% move. Other piece, don't just explore cloud, explore on-prem options too. It's still a valid option, right? There's a lot of people that have self-serving interests, meaning they're making more money today by selling the cloud. So they push you to the cloud. Or they say, hey, I want to sell you Dell because I'm a Dell partner, right? That's not a business reason for you. That's a business reason for them. So make sure you understand your partnership and how you're buying technology, how you're buying the cloud, because it may not be right for you. It may not make sense, or it may make wonderful sense. You should have done it 5 years ago. That's okay too. But make sure you understand that and explore different options and ask for different options, right? What would this look like if we didn't move to the cloud? What would we need, right? And they're going to tell you, and you may, out of that conversation, say, whoa, we don't need 3 data centers and this and that, because we could tolerate being down for a day or two if something that drastic happens. Have those conversations. Last, always be looking at this. This isn't like a disaster recovery plan. This isn't, actually, a disaster recovery plan is exactly this. You should always be revisiting, what are we doing to stay secure? What are we doing to stay resilient? What are we doing to stay productive or, innovative? You should always be revisiting those, because the cloud may not always be the best situation for what you're trying to do. So in closing, I think those are the key takeaways. It has nothing to do with the technology. It has everything to do with your business and how you think about it and how you rationalize it. Because, Amazon or AWS or Azure or whatever, they don't have your best interest always at heart, and they don't know what you're trying to do as a business. So make sure you keep your hands on the wheel with that. So, Melinda, do you have anything in closing?
No, I think we can take some questions. That was great.
We get off mute here. Well, thanks again, you guys, for another great presentation. We've got a couple questions right off the bat, and not surprisingly, they come right to cost first. Keeping in mind, most of our members and most of the people who attend these events are small businesses, many newer businesses. So obviously, cost is going to be a primary concern. Now, the first question we have is: are there any ready-to-go solutions that to get started? A cloud solution that you can really just pull off the shelf and just get started with it. Brian mentioned the in SkyMall catalog, you could just give your credit card and get right going. Or will the usage of the cloud really be a customized solution or setup process?
I mean, I think I can just start. If you're a brand new business, and this is a trend that we often see, using Google Workspace. It used to be called Google Suite. That's a very quick platform to get up and running with. You have all of your storage with Google Drive, your email. This is all powered by the cloud, and you will have a fixed monthly rate for that. And then it depends on what you need from there. If you need more storage, if you do need compute, if you're a software development firm, obviously you're going to need something different from that. But in terms of a business getting up and running, having some known costs and a reliable solution, that is a great place to start. As a company matures and gets bigger, again, the trend we usually see, just to use the Google Workspace analogy, we typically see that move to Microsoft. It has more capabilities. It has more security features. So that's, again, part of that solution switch from one cloud provider to another, and those capabilities all around it. But Brian, do you want to speak more to, let's say this is a software development company that's getting started. What else do they need to keep in mind? Because they have some pretty different needs.
So I would say we got a couple questions here on cost, right? And so what I would say is, and this isn't going to be the great answer that everybody's looking for and loving. The cloud infrastructure as a service, where you basically say, hey, we have a bunch of servers. I just want to get rid of those servers and put them in the cloud. What I will tell you is that's a lot harder to cost, estimate. Yes, there are tools, but a lot of times the tools, aren't exactly right, and you can end up with surprises. So that's why I say, go slow, maybe try something and see how that works and how that measures out. If you're looking to get started in a ready-made package, I would say look for software as a service platforms, because that is going to be, you have 5 users, it costs $15 a month per user. That's an easy cost, and that typically doesn't change unless if you change quantities, right? So I would say the infrastructure as a service, where you're kind of, we call it lift and shift, where you literally take the things and roll them out the door and then they magically go into the cloud. That is going to be a lot more variable in what the costs are, because you're paying like a utility model, like you do with your electric bill or your water bill. Use more, and if you don't have a good measure of what that is before you do that, you could be in for some pretty expensive surprises. Also, just like your cell phone, if you, and I've done this unfortunately, and you go to Europe and you don't realize that you don't have an international plan, and then you run up $1,000 bill by accident, talking to friends and family about maybe a football game or something, benign, you still pay the bill. They don't care that you made an oops, right? You are on the hook. The cloud is the same. If you make an oops, you're paying for it. There is no like customer support line where you call and say, I'd like to return this, right? So I think those are key. Things like HubSpot, things like Salesforce, things like Microsoft Office 365 or Google Workspace. That's a great place to start if you're saying, hey, I'm a smaller business, I want to, move to the cloud. That probably makes a ton of sense versus having, software you have to install locally. That might be a great way to start.
Brian, thank you for that. And you mentioned a couple of costs. I think you threw a couple of figures out there, but the next question is very much tied to that as well. What costs are associated with an average cloud setup? And then parenthetically, how does that compare maybe to a comparable on-prem? And I know you had said at some point when the business grows, there's going to be a natural switch to having both, and the cloud sort of becomes a backup to the on-prem, but still sort of staying with that initial setup, and as it relates to costs, and then maybe comparing that in the same light as, okay, I'm going with a cloud setup for now, knowing that in 5 years, 10 years, or maybe sooner, I'll need to go with an on-prem. Can you just put those in context to another?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there is a budding law firm that we work with. For instance, I'll give real world example. They bought some software that wasn't SaaS, so it wasn't like software that was just supported and all that. We had to actually put that in the cloud, support it, install it, all that stuff. It ran really slow. Quite frankly, it ran poorly actually. We tried to tune it out the best that we could. We tried to increase some of the networking and other things that made that speed, hopefully faster. It didn't, because the application never was really a good candidate for the cloud based on like what it had to do. So we ended up having to go to them and say, hey, we have tried really everything. We think this is going to be way not cost effective. And the bill was approaching $2,000 or $3,000 a month for the cloud to support that application. And we looked at it and said, hey, you know what? You don't have a ton of needs. We can easily get this back up and running. If you were down for, like half a day or whatever, would that be reasonable? Because if that's the case, we could probably save a bunch of money. We found a pretty resilient server. We found a way to back it up and restore to the cloud if we needed to, so that they could limp along. But they didn't have those ongoing costs just churning. And that server was like maybe $3,000, $4,000 up front. We got it set up. That cost a little bit. We already maintained and monitored it when it was in the cloud. So we're doing that anyway. So you figure, let's just call that a 2-month ROI. Yes, they have electricity costs. Yes, we had to put in a battery backup system so that, hopefully a power surge didn't take it out. And it's been flawless ever since. That's just like one example, right? And there, let's call it 12 people and growing. That's been able to scale with them just fine. So that's kind of on the lower, smaller side, right? So if you're really small, like 3, 4, 5 people, and you're just doing basic stuff, I'm going to say that tips the other way really quick, because your monthly costs might be $300 or $400 in the cloud versus, a lot more to have a server on site. And then you have to pay for somebody to maintain it. You have to pay for networking equipment, which arguably you probably have to pay for anyway if you have an office. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Melinda, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, I mean, I think the only thing I would say is, when you're thinking about the right solution, thinking about how many people you have, to Brian's point, whether you have a physical location or not, because many businesses now don't, that affects this as well. How you're going to grow, and that resiliency or uptime, that you need. Those are, I think, the really main components. And then, speak to an advisor that is agnostic, that doesn't have, as Brian was mentioning, the Dell rep, or, the certain margin they're trying to hit on equipment, or, selling cloud services, to really craft that in a way that's a right fit for you.
Perfect. And we could probably ask a million more questions. I know we're getting right up against it with time. I usually know it's a good topic when there's a little bit of silence, because it's so intimidating. And I represent that person who, if I had a small business, I wouldn't know the first place to begin. So thank goodness we have folks like you who are out there that can help us advise. So thanks again to both Melinda and Brian for a great presentation. Again, thanks to our chamber staff for helping to produce another successful event. And thanks to each of you for attending today and throughout the year. And if you're interested in learning more about your top tech questions answered, today's topic, be sure to check your email for a follow-up message with links to additional resources. That will include how to contact both Brian and Melinda if you want to contact them for more information about how you might be able to get started with them. Another shout out to our sponsors, Uprise Partners, for their support and contributions to the IT Basics for Business series throughout this year. We look forward to seeing you again on Tuesday, January 23rd at 8 a.m. when we hear from the Uprise Partners team on the topic of phishing and security. That's phishing with a PH. And it's not the band from Vermont. It's the security scams that we all know about. This is a really important topic because 88% of all data breaches are caused by, you guessed it, employee mistakes. And this will be our second episode of the season's IT Basics for Business. So hopefully you can join us. With that, have a wonderful rest of your day. Stay warm and enjoy the holiday season.